Well, it's a rainy teacher workday here in Stanton, Virginia, in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley outside. And I thought I'd catch you up on some science news from this issue of Science News, which is a combination of all the top stories in science for the past year. There we go, so you can take a look at what we're talking about. It has to do with genes and genetic engineering. There's a technique that's recently been gotten into good enough shape to use that can transform cytosine into T and adenine into a G in the nucleotide base sequence of the DNA. And that's really interesting. We could maybe cure many of these genetic disorders that are inherited, that are very painful and debilitating to humans. And these are things that can be fixed in a fertilized embryo. It's been done with animals, and it has also been done with humans now. Another thing and this is the Mensa Bulletin for February, alerting us of something that is an article in Science Daily, that we could use the same CRISPR Cas9 guide RNA and sort of a restriction enzyme gene scissors, sort of molecular machinery, in order to change the DNA of mosquitoes, so that they've been able to do this, but now that maybe they could change the DNA of the mosquitoes so that they might reject disease-causing organisms that they carry, or we might just make a whole bunch of them sterile so that we'd have less mosquitoes. But there are all kinds of possibilities now that we are able to actually do this. It's a little harder with humans, as we always would have suspected. Humans are different from other animals, unlike what evolutionist, atheist type science philosophers would have said. But in humans, it turns out that human embryos can actually, once we sever the DNA and try to put a new gene in its place, human embryos can actually draw from DNA on other chromosomes as a template to make a repair part for the damaged DNA that's damaged by the CRISPR-Cas9 mechanism, or any mechanism. Humans will do this, and evidently we haven't found it in other. This makes it a little harder because, we're sending in a particular gene that we want to replace the faulty mutated one. I thought mutations were supposed to be good. Isn't that how evolution changed us from fish into people over a long period of time? I always get evolutionists upset when I say that, but that is their theory. From worms to eagles is their theory, and of course from worms to us too, making eagles our little cousins. But that's only science fantasy and not science truth. Look at what it says here, though, that I find this disturbing. This lady is the president of a bioethics research institute, but she says we can now literally change our own species. Uh-oh. If you saw the movie Gattaca, there is a special panel that convened warning about this sort of thing. I think somewhere in here they actually mention the movie Gattaca and the dystopian society where people are degenerates if they don't have engineered DNA. But if we actually have the ability to play God like this, we could fix these genetic disorders. But what if you consider black hair, brown hair to be a genetic disorder? What if you consider gray hair to be a disorder? What if you decide that maleness or femaleness is a disorder for an individual? Of course, then you'd have to replace an entire chromosome, not genes, in order to make that change happen. Well, we've advanced a lot in being able to do this, and it's true. We can tackle genetic diseases, but we could also make designer babies. The nightmare that people have always worried about. And now finding out that human genetics is a little more complicated than we thought. I remember as an undergrad kid in college in the mid 70s, attending my first summer session for scientific creationism, which was, we don't say creationism anymore, though. Isms are easily dismissed uh, as we're warned in intelligent design theory. And Philip Johnson said we shouldn't use that term. It increases the stereotype. Otherwise, we should call it evolutionism. Well, anyway, that was thinking in the 1970s. But I remember in question and answer period, someone asking Dr. Dwayne Gish about genetic engineering, and Dr. Gish said, well, they're going to have to just build a lot of institutions for these monsters we're going to create, because the old one gene, one trait theory was down the drain. It turns out one gene may affect a dozen traits, and some traits are all impacted by a dozen or more genes. And then there are master regulator genes, and it just gets much more complicated than we thought. Well, that was what Dr. Gish, a biochemist from Upjohn Laboratories, said in his creationist ministry in the 70s. But take a look at this issue of the Mensa Bulletin again. It mentions that finally we've realized that there is a second layer of information hidden in our DNA. Oh, look at that. Just this past June in an article in a journal called Futurism. Well, I'll tell you, it was a long time ago that now a Bible-believing, born-again Christian, saved genetics pioneer John Sanford, after looking at the science, rejected evolution, and then he came to faith in Christ. He said in his book, the Mystery of the Genome, he said that DNA was so much more complicated than we thought. There are nested within nestings, within nestings, within nestings. Of course, there are epigenetic things. There are the turning on and turning off genes and master regulatory genes. It's far more complicated than we thought, which is why mutations by random would be insanity as a good thing, or considering it to be an onward and upward thing like evolution, Darwinian evolution demands. Instead, they're now appealing to more metaphysical, even supernatural means, the directed mutation. Directed by what? Mutated genes that evolved to direct mutation. They got all these chicken egg problems unless you believe in God. But Dr. Sanford said this a long time ago, back in the 80s and the early 90s, and now we're finding it's actually true. And so all the things that went with the biblical worldview turn out to be the proper cautions, precautions, warnings, and lines of a purposeful research that we should have been thinking about if we had taken tips from the Bible decades ago. And I'm afraid that the lessons are probably learned a little too late and coming from secular sources, and therefore the warnings are not going to be heeded, like Jeff Goldblum's character Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park said. John, we were worried about, you were so worried about could we, you never thought should we, and that's the thing that's coming. And a biblical worldview would keep us safe from those kinds of monstrosities that may happen. But, well, there's not too much hope that the scientific community at large is going to heed those warnings. So just keep an eye on it and keep praying, and you keep thinking. Have a good teacher workday wherever you are, and try to stay out of danger from the snow if you're in New England. God bless. Dr. J.